2024 was a wild year in the history of Bitcoin. Today, we're going to look back at all the top moments and milestones that happened in 2024. From Bitcoin ETF approvals to Bitcoin crossing 1 billion transactions, the Bitcoin halving, Sam Bankman-Fried and CZ being sentenced to prison, U.S. presidents and Congress talking about Bitcoin and implementing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, the top performing stocks globally being Bitcoin companies, and over 200 million investors now owning a piece of Bitcoin's network. It's time to smell the candles and own up to the fact that Bitcoiners have been right all along. And you might also want to consider getting on board before Bitcoin hits $1 million a coin. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Let's go. Milestone number 10 for Bitcoin in 2024. The Bitcoin ETFs being approved by the SEC on January 10th. On day one, a dozen spot Bitcoin ETFs traded 4.6 billion in ETF volume, which made it the best launch day for ETFs in the history of Wall Street. I was one of the first people covering these ETFs in the Bitcoin space, and I distinctly remember the $10 billion mark happening after day 3. That was extremely telling at the time because, for context, over 500 ETFs were created in 2023. And when you compared the flows and volume for those 500 to the 12 spot Bitcoin ETFs on that day, well, IBIT alone surpassed the other 500. Speaking of IBIT and BlackRock, here's what Uncle Larry had to say about Bitcoin.
Oh, I was a skeptic. Yes. I was a proud skeptic. And I studied it, learned about it, and I came away saying, okay, my opinion 5 years ago was wrong. Here's my opinion today. This is what I believe in today. I believe the opportunity today. I believe Bitcoin is legitimate. I'm not trying to say there's not misuses like everything else, but it is a legitimate financial instrument that allows you to have maybe uncorrelated, non-correlated type of returns. I believe it is an instrument that you invest in when you're more frightened, though. It is an instrument when you believe that countries are debasing their currency, debasing their currency by excess deficits, and some countries are. I believe we have countries where you're frightened of your everyday existence, and if you have an opportunity to invest in something that is outside your country's control, then you can have more financial control. And so I'm a major believer that there is a role for Bitcoin in portfolios. I believe you're going to see that as one of the asset classes that we all look at. I look at it as digital gold, as I said before.
Of course, Uncle Larry flipped his tune about Bitcoin because their IBIT product has been the most successful launch of any product in the history of Wall Street. Out of approximately 2,850 ETFs, IBIT now has more lifetime flows than any other assets have had in the past 10 years. And it did it in just 11 months. In total, Bitcoin ETFs have seen over 35 billion in inflows this year. When you compare that to gold only had 2.6 billion in ETF flows in its first year. Milestone number 9, MicroStrategy joins the NASDAQ 100. MicroStrategy has been the best performing stock in the S&P 500 this year, but what's crazy is that it joined the QQQ, or the NASDAQ 100, which means over 200 million investors across the globe now own a company that owns 2% of the overall Bitcoin network in MicroStrategy. Milestone number 8, Bitcoin is now seen as digital gold.
Or in the Federal Reserve itself, in terms of the system. What do you think of that idea?
I don't think that's how people think about it. I mean, it's so, people use Bitcoin as a speculative asset, right? It's like gold. It's just like gold, only it's virtual. It's digital. People are not using it as a form of payment or as a store of value. It's highly volatile. It's not a competitor for the dollar. It's really a competitor for gold. That's really how I think of it.
Let's be clear. Uncle Jerome Powell, is still a hater. And he's still a bit salty for unleashing the highest levels of inflation that the United States have seen in 3 decades and calling it transitory. But that being said, when Jerome Powell calls something digital gold, well, it sort of sticks. He's still a few years behind from what Bitcoin truly is, digital capital.
What distinguishes this, the digital capital?
Look, when we saw digital photos transform, a lot of people didn't get the fact that Kodak was going to get replaced by Instagram and Facebook, but they get digital photos. Digital capital is what happens when your long-term store of value goes from a building or goes from a portfolio of stocks to a digital asset like Bitcoin. Bitcoin represents the digital transformation of hundreds of trillions of dollars of capital in the world.
Right.
No one expected to see it, so they don't quite get
Right.
what it's going to be, except for the fact it's worth all the money in the world.
Milestone number 7 for Bitcoin in 2024, the halving. For those of you who are new to Bitcoin, the Bitcoin halving is when the supply of Bitcoin gets cut in half every 4 years or 210,000 blocks. So the available supply of Bitcoin gets cut in half that are awarded to miners who are securing the blockchain, and that makes Bitcoin more scarce. So on April 19th, 2024, the 4th out of 32 Bitcoin halvings happened. And what happens because of this is pretty simple. There's more demand and less supply. The most interesting thing about the halvings this year is that we actually hit all-time highs before the halving happened, which only happened before in previous cycles after the halving happened. And that's probably because of our milestone number 10, the Bitcoin ETFs launching. Bitcoin tends to enter its parabolic post-halving phase right about now. So I would hold on to the rails of this roller coaster. Milestone number 6, it may be small and it may be trivial, but it stands out to me because on May 5th, Bitcoin crossed 1 billion transactions. For all of the people that say it's a pet rock and it's not useful, well, it actually is passing more in volume in transactions than the Visa and MasterCard network these days. The Bitcoin protocol won't be stopped. Milestone number 5. Bitcoin becomes adopted by the mainstream media.
Bitcoin itself is a hyped up fraud. It's a pet rock.
You're back to that?
Yeah,
Really?
Of course, yeah.
The views voiced by Jamie Dimon here represented the majority of mainstream media just before this year. If you looked at all of the FUD out there with Bitcoin mining in particular, well, the amount of positive stories about Bitcoin mining and its energy usage from 2017 were less than 1%. And this year, it's flipped to 40%. When I just did a quick search of Bitcoin's mentions on CNBC's YouTube channel, well, there's almost 100 unique clips about Bitcoin specifically in this year alone. Which leads me to milestone number 4 about Bitcoin in 2024. Bitcoin, not crypto. Not only has Bitcoin continued to dominate the global market cap of the crypto space in general, but it's continued to show people that there's a difference between Bitcoin and crypto, like Ethereum, which continues to fall in value relative to Bitcoin. One of the reasons that people are starting to see the differences between Bitcoin and crypto is because they're separating the protocol from the people involved in the industry. People like Sam Bankman-Fried and CZ, which in April and March earlier this year were both sentenced to prison for the billions in dollars of fraud and corruption that they unleashed on the entire world. Hopefully, people continue to see the difference between Bitcoin, the protocol, and crypto. These companies have founders, shares, pre-mine, and they're privy to a bunch of information that you and I don't have. The Bitcoin code, the Bitcoin operating system is available for anyone to use anywhere in the globe, making it the most decentralized, open, and accessible investable asset in the world. It's apples and oranges, people. Hopefully, you'll continue to see the difference in 2025 and beyond. Milestone number 3, Bitcoin adoption by Wall Street corporations. MicroStrategy obviously has led the way since 2020. Other people began to follow suit. Companies like Metaplanet, along with MicroStrategy, have been the best performing assets in the world. Metaplanet has outperformed every company on the Japanese stock exchange. These two companies are paving the way for more than 60 other public companies who now own Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Companies like Semler Scientific, Mara, Riot, Cooler, which was just announced today, Rumble. It will be impossible for corporations to ignore in the future.
By market cap by the year 2033 or 2034. I still think that's very possible. And people just laughed at me and mocked. I'm like, just wait. Like, you don't understand like how crazy this is. And if you can do speculative arbitrage by borrowing dollars and buying Bitcoin with that and just growing and growing and growing, and then plus riding the tails of the exponential growth of the Bitcoin monetary network, the upside is almost limitless, especially when you compare it to limitless fiat currency creation. So I think it's all inevitable. I think it's coming. I think that every company that doesn't have Bitcoin on its balance sheet or a Bitcoin reserve strategy will go to zero over time relative to Bitcoin. So it's like, if you want to survive in the next 10 to 20 years, you have to switch over. To me,
Before we get to our top 2 milestones, let's take a quick break and hear this from our sponsor. Every week we talk about buying Bitcoin and how important it is in the world, and over time how we believe it's going to be the most valuable asset class that anyone can own in the world. Well, if that's the case, then we should spend an incredible amount of time not only buying it and procuring it and learning about it, but protecting it. And that's exactly why the Bitcoin Way exists. Members of their team will walk you through proper 100% self-custody, step by step, so you can remove all counterparty risk. Stop sharing your keys with third parties and ensure you protect your generational wealth the right way. Go to thebitcoinway.com and schedule a free 30-minute consultation with their team. Milestone number 2, the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve in the United States, being led by a pro-crypto cabinet.
And the strongest advocate you could possibly have at this point in time, and he's only going to be stronger because when he goes back to the White House in January, one of the first things he's going to be doing is to clean out the SEC and put together people in an administration that will look at Bitcoin as part of, as he said, the strategic reserve of the United States. So I think there's a lot of exciting times ahead. To those of you who are celebrating $100,000 Bitcoin, you're going to be celebrating much higher very soon, I think.
Bitcoin becoming a strategic reserve asset of the United States government is a massive set of news and will spark a global adoption race for Bitcoin all across the world. It's going to become a no-brainer for the United States to store its value in something other than its own issued currency. This idea isn't that far-fetched.
I think that is actually a really important thing. When you're the reserve currency of the world, you don't have somebody else's currency to save in. So the United States doesn't have another currency. It stores $600 billion in gold, which is a staggering amount. It's equivalent to 11 million years of American worker wages. So that's kind of crazy. Go to digital gold. Bitcoin, it's much better. And so I do think it's totally rational. The U.S. already owns 1% of the world's Bitcoins. Keep that, increase that. So I do think it is actually a really good policy. There's a couple countries that already do own Bitcoin. It'd be great for the U.S. to get out in the lead.
VanEck projects that the United States could significantly reduce its national debt by as much as 35%. And they project Bitcoin will grow to $42 million if it continues to grow at a 25% compound annual growth rate per year. This all stemmed from a proposal from Senator Lummis at the Bitcoin Nashville conference, where she proposed the Bitcoin Act, where the United States would acquire 1 million Bitcoin or 200,000 Bitcoin, 1% of the network, every year for 5 years until 2030. This has spurred on the global adoption race, which is expected to double in 2025. We're already seeing Bitcoin adoption happening stateside in states like Pennsylvania and Texas. Japan won't be joining the fray. They just went all Satoshi Nakamoto on us. They've neglected their own namesake, citing volatility, a lack of information, and legal concerns. But don't you make the laws, you're like the country. I don't understand that. But none of this really matters because of our number one milestone. And this may sound cheesy, but I believe it's true. The number one milestone for Bitcoin in 2024 is that it continues to persist. Every time Bitcoin makes a new block, it creates a timestamp of truth, a record of history, a record of value, a record of ownership, a record of property rights for billions of people globally. Every year that it continues to persist, every 10 minutes that it continues to persist, it will grow in value relative to a debasing fiat currency system. And if it's not going to zero, which it isn't, for all of the reasons that we've cited before, nation state adoption, corporation adoption, Wall Street adoption, United States Strategic Reserve adoption. If it's not going to zero, then it's going to 1 million.
I've always said it's either something or it's nothing. If it's embraced as an institutional asset, if it's legitimized as an asset, then it's not going to zero. And if it's not going to zero, it's going to 1 million. And I think the short answer to your question is education.
And Michael Saylor believes if it's going to 1 million, it's going to 13 million.
Bitcoin's 0.1% of the capital in the world right now. I think it's going to go to 7% of the capital.
7%.
My long-term forecast is it's going to go to 13 million over 21 years.
13 million.
13 million. But what is it 5 years from now? You're in your 4-year calculus.
You know, it's been growing 44% a year with about a 40 to 50 vol. I would think it'll move on at 40 then click down to 35, then 30, then 25, and at some point it'll be the S&P return plus 8%, and it'll be the S&P vol plus 8%, because it's always going to be a more global, open, free capital market.
How is there stuff that's above your pay grade? You're worth billions. I mean, we can say that it's above our pay grade, but who gets to decide if it's above your pay grade?
He might have been it's below his pay grade.
Right, exactly.
Bitcoin's an expression in this view that you want to invest in an asset without counterparty risk, which means you don't want to be counterparty to a country, a currency, a city, a company, a commodity, or a culture, right? So people think it's a risky thing. It's all about people wanting to not take risk. They don't want to guess whether Picasso's or real estate in New York or Nvidia stock will be higher in 10 years. They want to buy money. They want to buy 1/21 millionth of all the money in the world forever.
End it there, Michael. Thank you.
Great. Michael, thank you.
When Michael Saylor said that Bitcoin was going to 13 million a coin on national television, this was a truly iconic moment in terms of Bitcoin in 2024. But it also outlaid that we're not thinking large enough about Bitcoin being a store of digital capital, it becoming 7% of the $900 trillion asset market out there. This moment truly represented a paradigm shift mentally for Bitcoiners even like me out there. Bitcoin has no counterparty risk, and it's the only asset outside of the existing system. It grows with the continued dysfunction of the system, and it has more value as the only thing outside of that system if that system collapses. The United States debt is at $36 trillion and continues to show no signs of slowing down. So you might want to consider an insurance policy. By staying 100% in the existing system, you risk losing 100% of everything. Consider Bitcoin in 2025. And one of the ways that might help you on your Bitcoin journey is connecting this digital network with a human network in real life at one of these conferences. And one of the longest running Bitcoin conferences in the world, and the longest running Bitcoin conference in the United States for the past 8 years, has been the BitBlockBoom conference. On April 3rd through April 6th in Dallas, Texas, hundreds of Bitcoiners are going to come to hear from their favorite speakers like Parker Lewis, Marty Bent, Guy Swan, Gary Leland, Bob Burnett, and me. They're also going to come and get access to exclusive workshops like buying their first Bitcoin, taking self-custody, learning how to mine at home, or even coming to some of their favorite parties to meet their favorite Bitcoiners in real life, like the Saturday casino night, which I'm planning to have a bunch of fun at. If this excites you, if you want to meet Bitcoiners in real life, then I encourage you to go to BitBlockBoom.com and use the promo code BBB25 for $100 off of your all-inclusive ticket. That's BitBlockBoom.com and enter the promo code BBB25 for $100 off your ticket. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Happy stacking.